Welcome back to the DHF Podcast. I'm Scott McNay, pastor of the Lady Christian Church and board member with DHF. And with me, co-hosting today is Rick Brace. Good morning, Rick.
Good morning, Scott. It is good to be back on this side of the microphone with you today.
Yeah. It's good to have you with us.
Yeah, it's good to be back. And for those of you that do not know me, my official title is I am the DHF Church Liaison, which means I get to relate to 130 to 135 churches across the country. Puts me in a pretty unique position. And one of the churches that we get to relate to happens to be in Visalia, California. It is called the Fountain Christian Church. And we want to welcome to the microphone today Heather Sears, who is the pastor's wife. Heather, I don't know what Sam calls you. I call Nancy our chief financial officer, chief executive officer. She's a whole bunch of roles in the family. So, Heather, it is so good to have you with us today. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Well, one of the reasons we wanted to bring Heather into the conversation is that your background may be a little bit different than most of the people that are in our churches. You grew up in a Mormon family. What was it like for you, and what was it like to just grow up as a Mormon? Were you aware of differences between that and classic Christianity?
Well, I would call my childhood like pretty typical, pretty normal. At the time of growing up, I don't think I knew too many differences between us and other, people growing up in Christian homes or anything like that, because we called ourselves Christians. Family time was just so important to us. I mean, I remember growing up with lots of cousins, aunts, uncles, grandma, grandpa. I mean, we gathered just like any other family, we gathered for the holidays, anything to celebrate, we did. And we ate a lot. So,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah. So, yeah, I knew some differences between me and my friends as far as like, especially when I started to get a little older, like the dating rule, just I dressed a little differently than my friends sometimes. And, I did have the opportunity to go to other churches when I was younger. My mom allowed that. And so, when I was invited to go to my friend's church, it was a little bit different. I was kind of like, what is going on? Like, this is weird. And so, but I didn't experience that until I was, teenage years.
Okay.
But other than that, I mean, pretty typical, childhood growing up. So at least from my perspective.
You said when you would visit churches with your friends that it was kind of weird. Can you kind of open that up for us a little bit? What were some of the differences that made it, quote, weird to you?
Well, so when I went and visited other churches, like they would have a full band. That was weird during worship, and we didn't open up hymn books. That was weird to me. And let's see here. And then children's church was a little bit different in other churches as well. So I'd be like, wait, so you guys start out here, but then you go to children's church. But I was just used to going straight to, children's church or just staying in with my parents and being bored, throughout the whole thing. They also had a person standing up that was there all the time, that just normally did their sermons. And so that was weird to me because we had different people almost all the time. So I was just like, wait, you have a person that's like the experts? And you were like, well, yeah, that's our pastor. And I was like, pastor? What's a pastor? And so, some things started to pop up that I was just like, what? Wait, what? I had some questions there, like, wait, who is our expert? And so my mom was like, well, it's our bishop. And I was like, yeah, but he doesn't get up and talk. She was like, well, no, but he's still our expert. And I was like, I just had some questions there about like, okay, well, who do I go to then if it's not our bishop? And because he's certainly not up there every week giving us, an example of what to live by and things like that. So things like that started popping up every once in a while. And, me being a kiddo, I was just like, okay, whatever. I'm just going to go with it. So, and I had no choice at that point in time, Yeah.
Scott, what's rolling over in your mind? You got anything?
Well, I was going to say, so like at what age was it that you started, bigger questions started forming in your mind or challenging the way you thought?
I would say right when I got into the youth program, which was around 12, 13 years old. Mm-hmm. Other kids at school were more free to do a lot of the things that I wanted to do, like go to a friend's houses, have like little parties and things like that. Not like too insane at that age, but I wasn't free to do some of those things. And at that point in time, the whole expert thing started popping up, and I was just kind of, scratching my head a little bit and being like, well, family time is great. But, why are we doing it this way? Why, what is so important about this rule? I do remember asking my dad at one point in time, and I believe it was around the age of like 14, maybe 15. I said, Dad, why did God change his mind about polygamy? And he was like, well, they made it illegal in the country, the government made it illegal in the country, and God wanted us to follow the government's rules. And I was like, but if God is our lawmaker, wouldn't we just say, no, we'll follow God instead of our government? And he was just like, well, God wants us to be respectful. He was just trying to, cover it up. And then I was like, okay, well, what about caffeine? And he was like, well, I drink caffeine-free Pepsi. And I was like, well, I know that, but I'm allowed to drink Mountain Dew. And he goes, well, when God made that rule, pop didn't exist. So
let me bounce you back just a minute. Some of our listeners may not be aware of the prohibition against caffeine within Mormonism. So you might want, can you just say a little bit about that?
Okay. So I believe it is in the Book of Mormon. It's in, I believe, Revelations of the Book of Mormon. It is a law, basically a law that was passed down from God, that there would be no drinking caffeine, which is considered a drug. No, smoking, no drinking alcohol, things like that. So a lot of things were prohibited, kind of like going back to the Old Testament laws and regulations that don't eat certain things, don't put things in your body. Although we do now have the New Testament saying, hey, things are clean. So so, that's what really confused me as a kid, because I was being taught both things at the same time. A lot of things were Book of Mormon based. However, we did have a version of the Bible. And so I was able to cross-reference a lot of things, right? Now, I wasn't the most spectacularly scholarly person, but these questions just popped up, here and there. And I remember asking my parents about things, and they really didn't have great answers for me. And they were like, well, go talk to the bishop. And I was like, I don't want to talk to him. I want to talk to you.
Were you given the freedom while you were growing up? Were you given the freedom to ask questions about your faith?
Yes and no. So I would ask them regardless. But sometimes they would be like, oh, well, you'll figure that out when you're older. Or we'll talk about that later, once you're ready. And so, I was like, well, I have the question now. I'm going to forget it in a year. So, I did have the freedom to ask. Of course, in my family, I feel like we weren't as strict as some other families were as far as following the whole Mormon rules and everything like that. But it was difficult for me growing up because it was just one question after another would pop up, especially after something like a youth camp, or we would go on these outings and things like that, and a lot of emotional stuff would come up, and then I'd have a lot of just unanswered, was that real? Was it me? Was it just the atmosphere that was created, type of thing? And then I would ask about it, and they'd be like, oh, well, that's just the spirit moving. You're, you'll figure it out as you go. So I got a lot of answers like that.
Yeah. Right.
So what was your journey like when you made the decision, I can't do this anymore? I don't know that I can be Mormon. Was that pre-Sam, post-Sam? The interaction with your husband? Just tell us a little bit about that journey.
Mm-hmm. So it happened gradually. Like I said, I had a lot of questions growing up that weren't really answered to my satisfaction. I think the trigger really was for me to start backing out. It was a slow process. Was one trip that we took to a temple. And I don't remember if it was the Chicago temple or the Columbus temple. It really doesn't matter. As a youth, and we would do baptism for the dead. And I don't know if anyone knows about that, but basically, if your loved one died before claiming that they knew Jesus, or saying that, they knew God or whatever, you could put them on a list that was sent to the temple. And what would happen is a representative who went to the temple could get baptized for that person in that person's name, and they would go to heaven. And so I thought that was really weird. But at the time, of course, that was just part of it. That was what we did. And so I think the trigger was we went to a particular temple, and I think I got dunked probably about 20, 25, 30 times. They didn't even let me breathe between dunking. And it was horrible. It was a horrible, one of my biggest fears is drowning. And so and so I felt like I was drowning. And after that, I was just like, no more, I'm not doing this anymore. It really triggered me. And so after that, I got my license, of course, like at 16, like every other teenager does. And I was like, and my mom basically said, hey, you're 16 now. You're old enough to take care of your, you're old enough to drive yourself to church, during the week and things like that. I basically stopped going at that point in time. I was just like, there's no need for me to go. I went a few times, here and there to say hi to the friends that I had made at church and things like that. But, and at that point in time as well, socially, I was becoming a little bit more awkward as far as like, not wanting to hang out as much outside other than with my other friends at school. And the kids at church became a little bit more cliquey as far as like they just hung out, outside of church. They hung inside of church. A lot of them were homeschooled. So I really didn't spend a whole lot of time with them anyway. So I was just like, okay, well, I'm done here. I'm going to hang out with my friends from school instead of going to church. And so it was a long, drawn out, like slow process of me kind of just leaving. Come college age, I was 19 when I went to college. Not your typical 18-year-old. So I graduated when I was 18. I turned 19 a couple months later after I graduated. And I went to college 2.5 hours away. So during college, I checked out the Mormon church there, close to my college. But at that point in time, I was just like, you know what? This is not worth it. So I just stopped going to church all the time. And at that point in time too, I had done a couple of things that, in the Mormon church are considered like major sins. I had taken my first, drink of alcohol. I had a fiance at the time that, we were, let's just say, intimate. And so that was considered major, like wrong. Like you are going to hell. You are going to like outer darkness. God is mad at you for doing these things. And so at that point in time, I did seek out a bishop, and he was like, well, you just need to like stop taking sacrament for a couple of weeks or however long you think it'll take for God to forgive you. And then you need to pray. And then you need to do A, B, C, and D. Like it was a list of things that I needed to do. And I was like, no, if God's going to be mad at me, I'm just going to make him even more mad because this doesn't make any sense. I'm out at that point in time.
Wow.
Yeah. And I didn't go back to church, like church until I was in maybe I think it was like senior year of college, maybe. And a good friend of mine, hey, Liz, if you're listening, she invited me to her church. And I was like, well, okay, well, it won't hurt to go try another church and see what's up with that. And I went for a few weeks. It was a giant church. It was one of those mega churches in Lexington, Kentucky. And we were just kind of part of the crowd. And then we started going to a small group, and she kind of drug me along. She's like, okay, now I've got you. You're coming along with me. And so in that small group, we discussed some things that started me questioning again. So one of the questions that popped up was, what's God's purpose for you? And I kind of sat back and I was like, I have no idea. Honestly, I don't know. And so that got me thinking again. And my friend Liz actually gave me a book by Lee Strobel, Case for Christ.
Okay.
And I started reading it. And at that point in time, I was on MySpace. And I put a quote up about a scientist, like scientists believing in God. I don't remember the exact quote, but on MySpace, I put it up. And Sam saw it. And Sam and I had met through mutual friends and things like that at that point in time. And he was like, hey, I see that you're reading this book. If you have any questions, let me know. And I knew that he was, a minister at that point in time. And I was kind of like, well, that would be kind of cool to talk to, one of these so-called experts at that point in time. I was still young, dumb, and didn't know anything. And so we did. We started talking, and after I started, he asked me on a date, and we started dating at that point in time, and still was not saved, still was questioning everything. But he basically said, hey, this is what I think you should do. And he's like, you really need to be saved. And I was like, saved? What's that? And so like, I had lots of questions. I had no idea what saved even meant, because in the Mormon church, saved is not a thing. You either work toward your salvation to get into the celestial kingdom, which was what they call the celestial kingdom, where God resides, or you either go to one of the other so many planets that are out there without, with several gradients of God's presence. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, what is saved? What does that mean? And he's like, there's only heaven and hell. I was like, what? Wait, and so through him, I learned a lot. And he really influenced me on my decisions. And he took me to, he took me to, this is so stupid. He took me to a concert at a festival. And it was Corbin's little festival called Nibrock, or Corbin spelled backwards. And during that concert, it was a Christian band, and they
take your time.
I don't know why I'm crying.
Okay.
So they sent out for a whole prayer, like anyone who wants to know God better and follow me in this prayer. And I did. And then that night I went and I basically just got on my knees and I begged for forgiveness of everything. And I said, God, if you are truly who I've learned you to be, I know that you forget, you'll forgive me. And from then on, it was amazing. Just being accepted. So, and I didn't know it could be like that, but it is. So it's just an amazing journey that I went on, and from being so confused and feeling like I was not accepted to feeling like I was so accepted. It was just, like I said, it's just amazing. So,
Heather, thank you for sharing that part of your story.
So the question then is, after that decision and moment of transformation in your life, what kind of response did you get from your family?
So I don't think my family realized how far I had fallen from the Mormon church as far as, just backing away. I know that they knew that I wasn't going, but I don't think they realized that I was never coming back. Because a lot of Mormon families will be like, oh, well, they'll fall away for a while and then they'll come back. But when I think it solidified when I said yes to Sam when we got engaged, and they knew that Sam was, a minister, pastor, or whatever at a different type of church. And my dad, I think he was the most disappointed in me. Because he basically told me that I was sealed to him and mom for eternity. So but at the same time, at that point in time, I was able to verbalize why I didn't believe in Mormonism anymore. And I just told him, I was like, Dad, I've been looking for evidence for a very long time to see if the Book of Mormon was true. And I don't trust my feelings. So, and at that point in time, I had learned some, evidential things about the Bible that were absolutely true. Like, the archaeological digs and all of that stuff. So I was like, Dad, there's nothing to say that the Book of Mormon is true. Like, there's no hard evidence. And so he was like, he almost got angry at me. He was like, well, that the Book of Mormon took place in the Americas and what's in South America, the jungle, they can't find anything in that. I was like, Dad, that's not true. And no, it just doesn't make any sense. And so he was rather disappointed in my decision. But now we still have a great relationship, me and my dad. He, we just joke around with each other and act like nothing ever happened, and religion really never ever comes up, unfortunately. It's just it's there, things are there, but things aren't there at the same time. My mom, on the other hand, I think she was okay with the whole thing. She just wants me to be happy. And again, I still have a great relationship with her. She's actually coming here within the next week. And we're going to spend, a whole week with her. And so we still, talk like almost every day. If I haven't called her in a while, if I see that my phone contacts does not have her number in it for a while, I will call her and say, hey. But yeah, so, but my dad, on the other hand, he was more disappointed. Now, I will talk about the sealing for a little bit. It's something that happens in the temple for families. And what they believe is that they go through this sealing ceremony. I've never been through it, so I can't really talk too much about it because, like I said, I've never been through it. But it's supposed to seal your family to you wherever you go. So it kind of if your family gets into the celestial kingdom, it kind of guarantees that everyone else will join you that was sealed to you.
Heather, you have raised some really interesting theological questions. The whole baptism for the dead is one of them. The three, Mormonism doesn't teach there's a hell. There's only three levels. You have the celestial kingdom, which is the highest, the telestial kingdom, which is the next one down, and then the terrestrial kingdom, which is where Scott and I get a go, because we're not Mormon.
Yeah.
The whole practice of sealing your family, and then if you're married, to have your marriage partner sealed to you for all eternity. Those are some incredible things. The archaeological stuff, the Book of Mormon identifies 26 cities in South America with a population of over 1 million. And not one piece of archaeological evidence has ever been found, as you pointed out, for any of those 26 cities. So, gosh, there's so many rabbit trails, but so little time. So let me ask you one concluding question, and it would be this. If a Mormon family moves next door, or we move next door to a Mormon family, what is the best way for us as more conservative evangelical Christians to reach out to our Mormon neighbors?
So they believe in good works. Like, that's how they get to heaven. And so I would show them, I would actually talk to them just like you would anyone else about the good news or the gospel, and just kind of show them that we do good works because we have Jesus, not because we're trying to get into heaven. Because Jesus is our way to heaven.
Amen.
And it's it is kind of a difficult conversation to have. However, like I said, they see good works as you going to heaven. So I would work in the good works, like, if you see that their lawn needs to be, raked or mowed or something like that, go over and do it. Just, and say, hey, Jesus loves you and he loves me too. And that's why I did this. Or, if you're going to have that conversation, invite them over to dinner and spend as much time as possible with them, because time with others is very important to them as well. And so it's not the easiest thing to do, because they call them, like I said, they call themselves Christians and they think they believe in the same Jesus that we do. But that's not true. So we have to show them which Jesus we believe in. And we have to have sometimes that harder conversation. I think they use, let's see here. They use, I think it's James 1:5 that they use for the burning in the bosom, that they use to see if things are true and things like that. But if you so reading things in context, if they bring that up to you, read the whole entire passage to them and say, okay, so what is this really talking about? Context is huge when reading, and they don't get that a whole lot of times. They get snippets throughout their little, training and things like, or, going to church and things like that. They get snippets. They don't get the whole entire context. With their works-based faith, Romans 10:2 comes to mind, and it's they lack the wisdom, but they are full of zeal, and so they will do everything they can to get there, but they just don't. They just lack that knowledge of what Jesus is really giving them. And so I think showing that and talking to them about that is helpful.
That is great advice. If I could boil it down, it is establish a relationship, be willing to serve, and be hesitant to hit them with the 20-pound Bible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a slow, you have to go slow, because like I said, they believe that they are Christians, but if you start just spewing out things, they're going to be like, I don't, this is too much. So, some of them may know more than others. And so you just kind of have to be careful about how you go about talking to them.
All right. Well, Heather, thank you so much. Scott, back to you, brother.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. I appreciate you sharing some really personal experiences in life and very valuable insight that so many of us can put to use. For everybody listening out there, we appreciate you tuning in to the DHF Podcast. Feel free to send us questions, ideas, sounding board on what you're thinking about after these episodes. You can connect with us over at discipleheritagefellowship.org, and we appreciate you listening, and we'll hear from you as you hear from us next time.